Hello everybody and welcome to the sixth video in our series of videos on political developments in Ireland in the 20th century. So up until now we have been looking at the various political groups in Ireland, the nationalists divided up into home rulers, the IRB, Sinn Féin. We've also looked at unionists and we've looked at the home rule crisis that raged from 1912 to 1914. But today we're just going to take a step back and look at what life was like in Ireland at the time, both culturally and socially. So your learning outcomes for this video is, by the end of this video, you guys should know what cultural nationalism means. You guys should know three groups that promoted cultural nationalism and one fact about all of them. And finally, you should know what a tenement building was and some of the conditions within the tenement building. The first thing we're going to look at then is a thing called cultural nationalism. So after Home Rule had failed to be passed in the 1880s, many Irish turned away from political nationalism and instead wanted to focus on bringing back Irish culture, which they felt had been systematically destroyed by the British. So cultural nationalism wanted to show the cultural differences between Ireland and Britain. These people hated the Anglicisation of the country. So that would have been they hated the spreading of the English culture through language, through games and customs, which we saw was a policy brought in during the plantations. Some believed that the famine was used as a way to further get rid of the Irish culture so that they could become better English citizens. So the three groups that came to prominence to promote Irish culture were as follows. The first group was the GAA, or the Gaelic Athletic Association. This was founded in 1884 by a guy called Michael Cusack and a guy called Morris Davin in Thurles. The goal of the GAA, or the Gaelic Athletic Association, was to increase the numbers of people playing traditional Irish games such as hurling and football and handball, and to organise competitions so that more people would be interested in playing. Clubs were set up in different parishes and brought a lot of pride to the local parish. And the first All Ireland was played actually in 1887. The next cultural initiative was the founding of the Gaelic League in 1893 by Owen MacNeill and Douglas Hyde. We have already encountered MacNeill, who established the Irish Volunteer Force in 1913 after he wrote his article, The North Began. But 20 years before he did this, he set up the Gaelic League along with Douglas Hyde. Douglas Hyde will go on to become the very first president of Ireland. And the Gaelic League was set up to promote the Irish language because of the massive decline in people who were actually speaking Irish. The final noticeable group trying to promote Irish culture were the members of the Anglo-Irish literary movement. The most famous member of this group was W.B. Yeats, who even to this day is considered one of the greatest writers and poets to have ever lived. Members of the Irish literary movement, they wrote in the English language, but they used it to promote Irish folktales and history. So that even if the Irish language was in decline, the stories of the past could still inspire people to be proud of their Irish heritage so that their culture wasn't been lost, even if their language was. So we've looked at cultural nationalism and the effect that that had on society. But now we're going to look at what life was like in Ireland at the time. So cities such as Dublin were extremely poor. We talked about how Belfast was a developed city with a thriving industry, but conditions in Dublin were horrific. Belfast was a special case, but the rest of the country, the rest of the cities were bad. Dublin was in particular horrific. The poorest people in the city are the working class people. They lived in slums in terraced tenement houses. So these were large houses that used to belong to wealthy people before they had moved out to the suburbs. Now up to 8 families could live in one of these houses. With many families all living in one room. There could be up to like 12 people in the family from all generations, from grandparents to parents to kids, all living in these buildings. This is a photo taken. Everybody in that picture, all of them lived in that one building. Okay, so that's a 3-story building. Okay, so all the people in that picture actually lived in there. So in these filthy, cramped conditions, diseases like cholera and TB spread rapidly. Cholera you get from dirty drinking water, and a lot of these houses usually only had one tap and one toilet, which is outside, and this could be shared by up to 90 people. So these diseases like cholera and TB spread rapidly. On top of this, workers, they really had no rights, and we will be looking at how these conditions and the poor working conditions lead to the formation of trade unions in our next video. At this time also there was an emerging kind of feminist consciousness in Ireland. Isabella Todd really furthered women's rights in Belfast in the 1880s, and she campaigned for women's suffrage, or for the right to vote. Another major figure in championing the cause of women was Hanna Sheehy Skeffington. She set up the Irish Women's Franchise League in 1908. So while the suffragettes led the campaign for the right to vote in Britain, Sheehy Skeffington and her Irish Women's Franchise League led the campaign here. She was arrested multiple times for her feminist activities, and later on, her and her husband, pictured down here below, were arrested for their activities relating to anti-recruiting during World War One. All these campaigns led in 1918 to women over 30 being given the right to vote. Men only had to be 21. But when Ireland got control of its own parliament, they gave women the equal voting rights to men, and that was in 1922. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So by the end of this, you should know what cultural nationalism is. You should know that they were looking to show the differences between the Irish culture and the British culture. You should also know 3 groups that promoted cultural nationalism and one fact about them. So the GAA, the Gaelic League, and the Anglo-Irish literary movement. And you should know what a tenement building was and some of the conditions in that building. That's the end of the presentation. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something good from it.